Hi friends, it's Regina from Notes from Regina. I'm so excited to share this cozy winter card I made using the Spellbinders October 2025 large die of the month called Wonderland. The inspiration actually came from the book and show from one of my favorite holiday stories, The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. I just wanted that same cozy brownstone neighborhood vibe, something that feels like you're peeking into the story. So here's the die set, and there are over 30 pieces in this one, so many little details. To get that classic brownstone texture, I used the brick by brick 3D embossing folder for the outside of the house. Then I added a bit of distress ink and ground espresso over the surface to bring in all those details. I wanted to be sure that I kept the details that the embossing folder gave me, so I would tap the ink and then just lightly go over where I wanted to place it to give it a little shadow. Now, my desk is covered in white vinyl contact paper so that I can use the entire surface as a work surface, and it's just easy cleanup, just a little spray and wipe. Next, I started working on the child in the scene. All of the clothing pieces were die cut in red to match Peter's red snowsuit in the story. I placed the pieces down on my work surface, and then I just played around to see which pieces I thought I wanted to shade. I knew I wanted the snowsuit in red, but I knew I wanted to go in and add shadows to give it a more layered look. So right now, I think I am going to shade the inside of his coat, the socks, maybe the boots, part of his scarf, and his hat. I used distress ink and aged mahogany to add the shadows and give it more depth, and it gave it a nice contrast that makes it look like layers. And then came the assembly. So I put a dab of glue on my work surface. Again, I can just peel that right off. And wow, this kid alone had so many pieces. Like the die set itself had 30 pieces, and I'm pretty sure about 50% of those pieces were just for the kid alone. So I would dab it and put a little glue on the piece and then start to put the kit together. There's so many little pieces, but I will say that there are a ton of pieces, but it comes together beautifully at the end. Here you can really see how inking certain parts adds those natural shadows that just makes the whole thing pop. And now I am adding the little headpiece. Stick that right on the back where his coat is, and I added the front part of his scarf. I actually ended up using a tiny piece of foam on the scarf part because it was layered when I glued it down, and I wanted it to just be even. Just a tiny little piece of foam tape on the back. And then I added his hat. using my tweezers on this part because I could not for the life of me find my sticky pickup tool when I first started this card. There's this little mitten. And here's a little close-up so you can see the difference that shading made. Next, I started to put together the window frames on the house. These pieces were so tiny and delicate that I thought I was going to rip them before I got them glued down. Once I placed them on the front of the house and make sure they were aligned and I didn't have any excess glue showing, I just used an acrylic block to hold it down to make sure it would stay in place while it dried. And here is the main window. I love a die that has these many pieces that gives you this much detail. Next, I started adding all the little house details like the trim and the roof, and with the brick embossing, it really gives it that city brownstone feel. And here's the sled that I used a little piece of embossed black cardstock for. And for the gifts, I went with a mix of oranges. I really wanted this whole card to stay in a warm color palette with just a little burst of red and green. So I really stayed with shades of oranges and browns. And brown is really just orange toned down. And together they gave it that comfortable feeling I was looking for. This is just adding the little pieces of trim to the gifts. Another tiny little detail that goes a long way with die sets like these. After the gifts were all set, I then just glued the top of the sled down to the base. Again, just dabbing it in that little glue that I have on my desk and placing it right on top of the sled base. For the inside of the house, I use yellow cardstock for the walls to make it look like the lights are all glowing inside. I added the fine details of the base of the house to the interior portion. I made sure the brick layer could still bend a little bit, and then I used some foam tape to help pop up the curtains and the tree that you're going to see peeking throughout the window. I use larger foam tape in the middle, and then I use little strips on the outside so that it wouldn't show from the front of the house. And right after I added the foam tape to the front of the house, I realized I forgot to add the curtain hooks and the decorations for the tree. The curtain hooks and the tree decorations are made from the same cardstock. I just blended some metallic pigment ink onto some cardstock and used the die cuts for the curtain hooks and for the tree decorations. I didn't want too many colors in this card. I wanted everything to stay neutral. I think I wanted the star of the show to be the textured brick on the front of the house. And as you can see here, I finally did find my sticky pickup tool, which was great because I had no idea how I was going to pick up all those tiny decorations for the tree with my tweezers. So after I added the hooks to the curtains and decorated the tree, I took all of the foam tape off the front of the house. Everything was so sticky. And then I added the tree to the middle and adjusted it until it looked right to me. You're gonna see I'm gonna take it off and then add it back like 1 or 2 times, just so you can see the top of the tree through those window decorations of the house. I then added the curtains to the side windows, making sure that they weren't crooked and that you can actually see them. It was looking great already. I then popped the front of the house onto the interior of the house, making sure to line things up as best I can, because the front of the house actually shrunk a little bit when I put it through the embossing folder, so it's just a little bit smaller than the back piece of the card. For the snow, I used white cardstock and distressed grit paste in Snowfall. I wanted texture for the snow, but I didn't want it to be too bumpy, so I put some of the grit paste on the front of the card, on the cardstock, but then I smoothed it out as much as I could. I just wanted it to shine when you looked at the card and maybe have a little bit of texture, but not too much. I just kept smoothing it out just to give a thin hint of texture. And then I picked it up and dried it with my heat tool. And once it was nice and dry, I just used the dies that came with the kit and die cut the snow for the top of the house and for the bottom. I placed the finished window scene on a navy blue background cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and then I played around with the snow placement. I eventually ended up adding some foam tape to both the bottom and the top pieces to have them pop up on the card. I really have to teach myself how not to be so heavy-handed with the glue. Once I figured out where I wanted the snow to land, I played around with the placement of the child just to see how far up I wanted him or how far down, and I used a small piece of foam to pop him up on the card and glued him down. He has a little handle or a little piece of rope that he's pulling the sled with, so I glued that down as well. I used the tweezers just to hold it in place while it dried. And then I used a little bit of glue to glue the sled. Now, for some reason, the sled did not want to stay in place, and I think it was because it did not want to stick at first to the grit paste, but it did eventually dry. For the gifts, I used little pieces of foam tape for the top two gifts just to pop them up a little bit to give the gifts a staggered look. And I glued the biggest gift that I die cut directly on the sled. It looks so good. I love how this came out. Finally, I trimmed off any excess cardstock from the side and the bottom of the cards. And that was it. So many details, so much work, but I absolutely love how this came out. And here's another version I made using this die set. Two different cards that look the same but have a different feel depending on the colors and the trim that you use for the house. Thank you so much for watching and crafting with me today. If you enjoyed this project, don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with a friend who loves cozy winter cards. Until next time, happy crafting, and remember, every card tells a story.